one of the things that we've talked about is that the path ahead on climate, we talk about the science, but in many ways, it's primarily a leadership journey. And for many of us, it's both a personal and a professional calling. So to kick off, I just wanted to ask you what first inspired you to use your leadership role to focus on sustainability and advocacy. Just a little bit about your personal journey and background in this field.
Thanks for asking. I think it's such an important place to start. And in many ways, my path to advocacy, to organizing for change, for building a better New York City, but in so many ways just better communities, didn't actually start grounded in climate. It really started grounded in community development, anti-poverty, and affordable housing work. I went to college on the south side of Chicago and was just so angry at the inequality that was there, visibly on display, and felt like it was critical to do something about. And I got to meeting people in community development organizations, nonprofit neighborhood groups on the south side of Chicago, organizing for change. And I was really inspired by that. And that was what led me to want to be part of the community development movement, let's call it, grassroots neighborhood organizations working for change in their communities. And I decided to have a career in that. So when I moved to New York, I started working at a place called the Fifth Avenue Committee, which is a nonprofit affordable housing, tenants' rights, economic justice, and neighborhood development organization. That was in the early 90s, really in many ways just as the environmental justice movement was being born.
Yes.
And over the years, I started to see the connections between that community development, anti-poverty, affordable housing, tenants' rights, economic justice work, and all these climate and environmental issues. The neighborhood just to the south, Sunset Park, with a bunch of power plants and all of the impacts of environmental injustice. And then I had kids, and that starts you thinking a lot more about the future and the long term. And in many ways, it was through the activism of young people that this clarity that sustainability is an essential element, not just for the planet, but for every one of our neighborhoods, and that it's a place in which opportunity is created, but also injustice is created if we don't do something about it. It's perpetuated. And this, so I ran for city council, still mostly focused on affordable housing, economic justice, workers' rights, public education. But over the years, climate just rose up and up and up and up. And when I got elected city controller, which is a job in many ways to keep an eye on the long term, it seems to me clear that if your job is focused on the future, then sustainability, confronting the climate crisis has to be job number one.
I really appreciate how you started with community development and justice topics, and that brought you in a way to climate. Today, there's an appreciation that we can't solve one without the other. As a matter of fact, we have an interconnected system, and these things don't exist in silos. And I also think a lot about what you said about kind of both injustice and opportunity. They're flip sides, I think, of the same coin. We're on this journey where we have so much that we need to reimagine and rebuild. And we can embed principles of justice in the way that we work on climate topics. We can embed governance and really lift the system together in a way that's holistic.
Yeah, we'll come back to this when we get to investing, because I think it's easy to focus only on risk, and harm, and you got to do that, but you can get paralyzed. I worry in the investment space at the moment that some people are just only focused on opportunity. Like, you can make a lot of money investing in climate solutions and transition, but then you kind of ignore the need to draw down fossils. And so anyway, we'll come back to that when we get to investing, but you really have to hold both of those things together in the work.
We are going to come back to that. Speaking of holistic, I wanted to learn more from you just about what your daily role is. Actually, being comptroller covers so many facets, and you lead in all of them with so much energy. For those who might not be familiar, would you be willing to explain to us what the New York City Comptroller does, and
No one
how
is.
you use the position to lead in these topics?
Absolutely. No one is familiar with the job of New York City Comptroller. So I like speak at a lot of graduations, CUNY and middle school and even elementary school, high school graduations. And I do a bit about like, who's dreaming of growing up to be a comptroller? And I've never had a hand raised yet. So
Oh no.
every now and then a kid will come up afterwards and say, I want to be a comptroller, but I don't think they were thinking about it before I spoke there. So yeah, the New York City, and you can say it either way, comptroller or controller. And the job is the chief financial officer for the city and also the chief accountability officer. So on the financial officer side, we do the city's annual audit. We make sure that the way that we've said we're supposed to be spending the money is where it gets spent. We're the budget watchdog for the city. I don't get to decide where the money goes, but I keep an eye on every penny. We register contracts and make sure they're let appropriately. We do the underwriting for the city's bonds that finance our infrastructure. And then most important for this conversation, we manage the city's 5 pension funds. I'm the investment advisor, custodian, and a fiduciary on those funds, which have their own boards that I'm a member of, but then I also serve as investment advisor for each of them. And that's $270+ billion of assets under management that are the retirement security, teachers and firefighters and public hospital nurses and school crossing guards and all the amazing municipal workers that make the city run, to whom we promise retirement security and then have to invest the funds in a way that's consistent with those promises. And then I'm also chief accountability officer. So we're responsible to audit every city agency at least once every 4 years and make sure they're doing the job appropriately. And we find places we can do government better. Some of that is catching waste, fraud, and abuse, but a lot of that is saying, what are the goals of this program, of this spending, and are we achieving them? And are we achieving them efficiently? And are we achieving them equitably? Equity and sustainability are part of that. We have climate goals. We're thinking about how resources are distributed. And, that's a critical part of accountability. It's not only efficiency, it's also, are we meeting the promises that we've made? A kind of democratic accountability. And then I think there is this sort of chief long-term view officer role. Our politics are pretty short-term. People are thinking about the press cycle or the next tweet, maybe the next election, but pretty rarely, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years down the road. But we're assigned to those pension obligations run out for decades. Our bonds are 30 years. And so part of the job is thinking about the city's future in that long-term way. And so that means investing the pensions wisely. That means thinking about public education and workforce development. And it most certainly means confronting climate risk, both doing our part as a city to reduce emissions and mitigate the climate crisis, and then, of course, adaptation and resiliency and getting our city ready for the era of rising seas and rising temperatures and smoky skies and all the impacts that we know are coming, that we've got to act now if we're going to be ready for.
Mm-hmm. Focusing on the long term is something that I think is very clarifying for leaders. And as you mentioned, across accountability, across investments, across city budgeting and planning, these are all long-term issues. Sometimes, especially in the markets, the focus can be so short-term, and I think it pulls us away from best interest, even for investment performance.